see any commercials on television that when you see them you just go like this? Because you can see the lie behind the...
Yeah, I think probably the sickest of all of these commercials are the California happy cows.
Okay.
You see these happy cows in green, lush pastures talking about how great it is to be a California cow. And of course, most California dairy cows don't step foot on grass. They don't eat a blade of grass in their lives. They live on filthy dirt feedlots where they're often out baking in the sun and their lives are nothing like those in the ads. It's a blatant case of misleading advertising.
Tell me a little bit about the life of a dairy cow. So you've mentioned that they never see grass. I understand that they are milked continuously and that about 90% of these cows have what's called mastitis, which is an infection of their udders. That can't be good.
Dairy cows are oftentimes milked 2 to 3 times a day, and we've bred them to produce so much milk that there's far more milk than they would ever produce naturally, probably about 10 times more milk than they would produce, which leaves them in a state of discomfort if they're not being milked. And they are suffering as a result of that. They suffer also because they're oftentimes kept on concrete. They don't have a reasonable bedding material, so they can have problems with their hooves like laminitis, which is a very painful problem. But mastitis is a very painful and common udder infection in the dairy industry. It comes about through a variety of reasons, but they're all production diseases. You don't really see, like if they were living in a much more natural setting, mastitis. You really see it in factory farms. And it's painful for these animals to suffer with that.
Now, this might be like a thing that I heard from like a super vegan or something, but isn't there a certain amount of pus and blood that the USDA allows into our milk supply? Is that a myth, or am I
that's not a myth.
Unfortunately on the right page with that?
Yes, there is a certain amount of pus, which the industry would call somatic cell counts, but yes, it is pus that is allowed in, I don't know the exact parts per million, but it is a set limit that is allowed in the milk supply.
Okay. That makes me sick. Because, I mean, it's like there should be zero amount. Like, I don't care what the percentage is and how they try to pass that past me. 0% of pus in my milk, please. Thank you. But also, now, if I see some sort of milk or even other animal products that do not say hormone-free or it's a common in bovine growth hormone, correct?
Yeah.
If I don't see that label, can I just assume that they've been treated with this hormone?
Most likely. The use of bovine growth hormone, or RBST as it's sometimes called in the dairy industry, is pretty widespread. And these are animals who already produce an enormous amount of milk. Giving them this hormone to cause them to produce even more milk is bad for them, and it's bad for us.
Well, because it can be transmitted into the milk, right?
There can be residues in there, but it can also increase lameness in the animals. It can increase rates of other illnesses, which nobody wants. It's not good for us to have ill farm animals.
Right, absolutely. Now, here we go, again with the poop. Tell me about, because you've got all these animals, these cows, and they're outside. What happens? I understand that a cow, there's a lot of stuff to be dealt with at the end of the day with even just one cow.
Right.
So what's happening to all this stuff? Where is that going?
So with all the human waste in the United States, or nearly all of it, it gets treated, right? You don't just go throw it out into the river, go put it in your backyard, it gets treated. Mm-hmm. And however, farm animals in our country produce vastly more waste than we do. Mm-hmm. In fact, I mean, one factory farm could produce the amount of waste that a city could produce. About 500 million tons of excrement are produced by America's farm animals.
In a year?
In 1 year.
Okay.
And nearly none of it gets treated. It just gets directly applied to the land. It can seep into the waterways and cause real problems with excess phosphorus and nitrogen in waterways. And you think these are not only, too many nutrients is of course bad no matter what, but these animals are being pumped full of antibiotics or in some cases hormones, and that's not what we want going through our waterways. Right. That's not what we want, being untreated, just being delivered right onto the land. Manure by itself is not that bad for the land.
Right, it's fertilizer, right?
Exactly, but the problem is when you concentrate so many animals in one space, you have way more manure than the local land can hold.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have that manure being concentrated in a manure lagoon, like much of the pork industry does, if that overflows or if it leaks, if it rains too much, if there's an earthquake, whatever, you have that go right out into the environment. So the solution to pollution is dilution, not concentration. When we keep on concentrating animals, then we put ourselves at greater risk, and of course them at greater risk too. But we need to dilute the problem by spreading those animals out.
Okay. And then, I was thinking with all these floods that were in the Midwest, because I'm a total nerd, but here's what I'm thinking. There's of course terrible things, but I thought, what's happening to all of those lagoons that have all of that stuff? Because the Midwest has a lot of factory farms.
Indeed.
And a lot of lagoons with a bunch of stuff in there.
Yeah.
And so you flood that, and what happened there?
Yeah.
Where does that go?
These floods cause manure lagoons simply often to just burst out into the open, to get absorbed by the local land, going into the waterways, going into drinking water too. There have been some factory farms that have been ordered to provide bottled drinking water for their neighbors because they had polluted the water wells system so much that the people couldn't drink the water in their own community anymore.
Now, how can they get away with this? This is where, I continuously read these stories, and it's I read the story of North Carolina.
Yeah.
And the guy who discovered this went and talked to his legislators, he talked to the local people, he talked to all kinds of, organizations and said, yeah, you got to stop this. This is poisoning our water. This is poisoning this. There are many people crying out, people who live near factory farms and all this, and their cries are heard to deaf ears.
Yeah.
How are these people able to get away with this? This seems preposterous.
It is preposterous. The meat industry's influence on state legislatures and on the Congress is quite immense. Look at the most recent farm bill that was just passed by the House of Representatives. It included no measures to combat factory farming. It contained nothing to improve animal welfare, but it did contain a provision that would nullify state farm animal protection laws. But you can see the power of the meat industry when you look at that type of legislation getting passed.
Well, is the simple way of saying this is that they're getting paid off? I mean, is that the simple way of saying it?
I think that many lawmakers would look at the major meat titans and the egg and the dairy titans and think to themselves that these are potential campaign contributors, they're potential job creators, they're potential tax revenue. These are companies that they want to be friends with. They don't want to have them as enemies.
Well, and also, aren't the heads of some of the people of the organizations that are passing these laws or keeping them from being passed, aren't they former employees of these industries?
There's a revolving door between the meat industry and USDA officials. In fact, people who worked at USDA who wanted to become whistleblowers to expose malfeasance and cruelty to animals and food safety problems, oftentimes in the past have been punished, not rewarded, for speaking out.
That's a shame. Politics.
Yeah.